I have always loved history. From a young age, I was fascinated by the kings, the queens, and the emperors. I loved that Roman emperors could just tack on Caesar or Augustus to their names, and that kings and queens are often remembered as the conqueror, the magnificent, or the lion-hearted. Naturally, I wanted some of this positivity for myself, so I decided to adopt an epithet too. It was perfect. Powerful but simple, and to the point. Catherine the Great. You can imagine my inevitable disappointment when we started learning about Russia. I was even more disappointed when my attempt at a little bit of prestige was called arrogant, pretentious, and egotistical. From a young age, we're reminded not to brag at the risk of sounding conceited or self-important. And this admonishment is especially common for young women, who are often labeled or judged for being assertive. I mean, even rapper Kendrick Lamar reminded us in his 2017 hit song Humble to sit down and be humble. But despite the song's numerous Grammy wins and coveted #1 position on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, maybe Lamar wasn't entirely right. Although no one wants to hear you talk about how much your job pays, how many famous people you know, or how many Fortnite wins you have. Constructive and purposeful bragging can help us build our confidence and take ownership of our accomplishments. So today, let's look at why we dislike bragging in the first place, before getting into its numerous benefits, and finally, learning how to brag the right way. So, as I've learned more over the years, I've discovered that history is full of some pretty great braggers. Take Sir Walter Raleigh, the famous English privateer and explorer. In 1595, Raleigh led an expedition to Guyana, and despite returning home almost completely empty-handed, he wrote an exaggerated account of his travels, claiming to have discovered El Dorado, the fictional city of gold. Raleigh's tall tales typify the behavior that comes to mind when we think of bragging, and why we dislike it so much. And while it's pretty clear why we hate this obnoxious, overt, and often dishonest bragging, what people seem to dislike even more is called humble bragging. This term was first coined by comedian Harris Whittles in his 2012 book Humble Brag, The Art of False Modesty, and it refers to people who try to mask their bragging with a complaint or a self-deprecating comment, but it isn't fooling anybody. Research conducted at UNC Chapel Hill and Harvard in 2018 concluded that most people find an overt bragger and even a complainer to be more sincere than a humble bragger. But even beyond this humble bragging phenomenon, we tend to criticize even the most inoffensive braggers because of our own insecurities. We are critical of those who are willing to talk about their successes because we feel like we don't measure up. We've all fallen victim to this toxic mindset, and I am no exception. But this culture of criticizing braggers hits even closer to home for women in the public sphere. From the workplace to school to everyday social interactions, women who are assertive are often labeled as bossy or pushy, when the same behavior is allowed and even encouraged among men. Researchers Graham Staines, Toby Jairatney, and Carol Tavris found in their 1973 research a phenomenon we now call Queen Bee Syndrome. They found that women in positions of power often sabotage their female colleagues. Sadly, instead of sticking up for their sisters in the workplace, too many women are all too quick to add to the vitriol against other confident, decisive women. And these negative stereotypes permeate a variety of interactions for women. Nancy Clark writes in an article for Forbes that people are constantly forming impressions of you. And if you're a woman, those impressions might tend towards wife, mother, sister, girlfriend, low-level employee, or helper images, making it all the more important that as women, we overcome our hesitancy to brag. But despite our society's stigma against bragging, self-promotion is not only important, but often absolutely necessary. Instead of beating around the bush, we need to adopt a more direct and assertive approach to talking about ourselves. Christy Hedges writes in an article for Forbes that the average American reads or hears 100,000 words every day, which makes it so much less likely that your message is the one that sticks. We have such limited real estate in others' minds, so we need to make sure that our words count and paint a picture of ourselves that we are proud of. Bragging is important for everyone, yet almost everyone feels a certain degree of discomfort when talking about themselves. Fortunately, bragging can help combat this and serve as an antidote to low self-esteem. Odom even writes for Psychology Today that bragging can cause a short-term motivational jolt based on the reactions of our peers and the act of bragging itself. And we can channel this motivational jolt into our future work, building our future successes, and thereby our future confidence. But even beyond these practical benefits, bragging is important because it helps us share our stories. John Corcoran of Business Insider reminds us that one of the most often overlooked reasons to talk about ourselves is that our best stories keep life interesting and help us truly get to know one another. So how do we start bragging more effectively? And how do we draw the line between confidence and arrogance? Let's discuss a few simple guidelines we can follow when talking about ourselves to improve our reception. First, understand when it's appropriate to brag. Sometimes it's simply not a good time. If your best friend just broke up with her boyfriend, don't tell her about how perfect you and Chad are together. And if your friend just failed his physics exam, don't talk to him about your perfect score. Use common sense and be sensitive about the situation you're in. Next, be specific. Don't just talk about how great you are, talk about your specific accomplishments. Instead of saying, I'm a great candidate for this job because I'm a good communicator, talk about how you built those communication skills. Focus on your hard work and be sure to offer credit to anyone who helped you along the way. Peggy Klaus, a communications and leadership expert, advocates a brag-a-log, which is a short story or a pitch that highlights something positive about yourself. A brag-a-log can be helpful in the workplace or any time we're trying to make a good first impression, because it shows concrete evidence of our best qualities and achievements. Finally, be genuine. I am encouraging you all to brag a little bit, but when you do so, don't try to deflect or soften with a self-deprecating comment, because people can generally see right through it. When you talk about yourself, make sure you're being your authentic self. So today, we looked at why we dislike bragging, before getting into its numerous benefits, and finally, learning how to do it the right way. So maybe I was being a bit ostentatious back in the day, calling myself Catherine the Great. But maybe I was on the right track after all. As a society, we need to embrace bragging and stop criticizing people for being proud of themselves. So even if using an epithet isn't your thing, there are plenty of other ways you can talk about yourself effectively and constructively. So I encourage you all to go out there and brag about it. Thank you.